for inviting me to be part of this IC. I'll be talking about the congenital eyelid anomalies. This will mainly concern the anomalies other than the ptosis, which will be covered in a separate lecture. We know that the development of the eyelid actually goes in these 5 stages, where the eyelid folds initially form, they fuse by about 2 months of in utero life, and this fusion remains on till about 6-7 months of intrauterine life. After that, the eyelid separates, and that is the time when the differentiation of the lid margin happens and the other adnexal structures actually form. And finally, the process of maturation goes on till the time of the birth. So any anomaly in the development of any of these stages can form any of the congenital eyelid defects. If you go by the stages of development, there is a list of anomalies, but these are the common ones which we see in our clinic. Anomalies of the lid fold formation can give rise to either a partial or a complete cryptophthalmos, an eyelid coloboma, euroblepharon, blepharophimosis, or epicanthus or epiblepharon folds. In the lid margins, what we commonly see are the antropions and the ectropions, but we can see other things like the ankyloblepharon also. And in the anomalies of the structures, the commonest ones being the vascular anomalies that we see, the hemangiomas, and also the disorders of the skin like the ichthyosis and other congenital eyelid tumors. Why it is important to treat the congenital anomalies? From the functional point of view, the eyelids are very important for the visual development. Any deformity in the eyelids can actually hamper with the process of visual development. So it's very important to recognize them and treat them at a stage where visual development can happen appropriately. Also in the children, the parental concern is very high there, mainly because of the cosmetic concern, and since in the children's, the skin around the eyelids are not really very lax, so it's very difficult to camouflage any deformity or any scars or by any other measure other than surgery. I'll start with the congenital entropion, which is probably the commonest one what we see. It can range from a mild form like this, where the eyelash are just turned inside, but they're not really rubbing on the cornea or causing any functional problem. But sometimes it can be severe like this, where this was a slightly older child, in fact, who had come with this problem of watering from the eyes. She has a severe entropy, and some of the lashes are even touching the cornea in the primary gaze also. So there are various theories why it has been proposed that why it happens, right from the problem with the retractors, the defect in the tarsus, or sometimes even hypertrophy of the orbicularis. We need to treat these children because many a time this rubbing of the lashes can cause persistent watering from the eye. The child sometimes becomes photophobic if there are SPKs or corneal epithelial defects. And in the severe case, the child can also end up having corneal erosions and ulcerations. It's important to differentiate this entity from epiblepharon, which is basically an extra fold of skin in the lower eyelid area, usually seen in children who have a lot of fat pads of the cheek area. And over a period of time, as the child grows, this usually tend to get corrected on its own. So they sometimes, most of the time, in fact, they do not need any surgical correction unless and until it's very severe and the eyelashes are actually turning in and rubbing the ocular surface. Surgery is very simple if we have to correct it. It involves mainly excision of a strip of skin and skin muscle spindle excision, what we call it, centered on the area where the interned eyelashes are there, and then suture it back after excising the required amount of skin muscle spindle. Important here is that we tend not to overcorrect. We usually are on the side of undercorrection because we don't want to land up causing an ectropion, which can cause more problem. And also important here is the fact that when you are suturing back the skin muscle strip, you should take a bite with the lower border of the tarsus to prevent this the lower part of the orbicularis overriding and again causing this recurrence of the entropion. Cosmetically, using a subciliary incision actually gives good cosmetic result. As in this child, this is just 1 week follow-up and the scar is actually hardly visible. Typically, we have been taught that we need to excise a strip of orbicularis muscle also while we are doing the congenital entropion surgery, but recent studies actually say that if you do the histopath of the tissues in the patients who have undergone the surgery, there is no hypertrophy of the muscle which is actually seen in these patients. So whether we are justified in removing an orbiculary strip is debatable, especially in the severe cases where you have to sometimes take out a very big strip and it can cause other problems. Non-surgically, the milder forms, specifically the epiblepharon, can be managed by injecting the fillers, the hyaluronic acid, in the suborbicularis plane in the area where this epiblepharon is there. It acts as a kind of mechanical stent, and it stretches up the skin so that this interning of the eyelashes is getting corrected. And it works for about 6 to 9 months or sometimes even a year. And so in some cases where the correction is temporary or the patient is not fit for surgery or you feel that the correction might happen over a period of time, this can actually be an option. What about this child? He is a newborn child presented with an corneal ulcer. So and when you evert the eyelid, this is what we see, a very prominent posterior angulation of the tarsus. So this is what is known as the tarsal kink, which is not a very common entity, but we rarely can land up seeing this kind of patients, especially from the newborn nursery. So the dictum is that in any newborn child, if the patient presents or is born with a corneal ulceration or an exposure sort of picture, it's mandatory to have a look at the eyelids to look for this entity, which is very easily correctable by simply doing what we do for the senile entropion, cicatricial entropion, a tarsal fracture procedure, and put in everting sutures. Some people even do a temporary tarsorrhaphy for this patient, but since this entity is very rare, the actual protocol of surgical management is not really very well defined. But most of the time, whatever surgeries people have described, they actually work. Ectropion is not very common, unlike the congenital entropion, usually associated with the syndromes like Down syndrome patients, blepharophimosis, and at times we can see it in association with the ichthyosis, congenital ichthyosis, where it's basically a cicatricial ectropion, which patient can land up having pictures like this, a severe corneal ulceration. The treatment remains same as for any other cicatricial ectropion, mainly a full thickness skin graft, but here, unlike in adults, the skin grafts actually are not very cosmetically good in children. So unless and until the ectropion is very severe or causing any sort of functional problem, it's preferable to avoid a grafting surgery in child as much as possible. And in children like this, for example, in this child who probably had an ectropion in both the eyelids and might have needed a grafting because of functional problem, exposure and all, but since in children there is not enough skin available to do a full thickness graft, a split graft was done for this patient, and obviously the appearance is not really cosmetically and the parents are not really happy with the cosmetic appearance. So the threshold for doing a grafting should probably be a little higher in these children, unlike in adults. Another technique, which this was part of my fellowship study, what we did, like in ichthyosis patient, the problem is like getting healthy skin to do a grafting in these children. So that always used to be a problem, especially in cases where the child has 4 eyelid ectropion with corneal exposure, where you have to do something on an emergency basis. So we actually started doing maternal skin allograft for these children, and some of them have done actually very good. As we can see in these children, over a period of follow-up, the color and the matching of the skin color of the graft is very good, and functionally also, the child was doing quite well. Recently, I think when Dr. Santosh has probably started doing, instead of doing a surgical management for these ichthyosis patients, especially the milder spectrum ones, they do very well with a protocol of using systemic retinoids, which usually the derma people want. They have a protocol for that. They use it for a longer duration, systemic retinoids, along with the use of skin emollients, and many of these patients can actually be managed just by the use of this non-surgical management. Blepharophimosis, I'll very briefly cover it because I think it will be covered with the ptosis. We know it's a tetrad of ptosis, blepharophimosis, epicanthus inversus, and telecanthus, and it can be there in various combinations. Usually the correction is based on medial canthoplasty. That remains the crutch of this, correcting these disorders. It can be done, the correction can be done either at a single stage or a 2-stage procedure, depending on the age of the child. In smaller children, we tend to just correct the ptosis to expose the pupillary axis, and when the child grows up, say about 5 to 6 years of age, that is the time when the medial canthoplasty is done. The conventional canthoplasty which is done, which has been described, is the double Z-plasty or the Mustardase technique, which leaves quite a bad scar in the middle canthal area. So what is more preferable is doing a CY plasty where the scar is not very obvious, and combining this with a lateral canthoplasty and a temporary ptosis correction can give better cosmetic outcome. But at the same time, we have to counsel the parents that it's never possible to give a normal appearance of the eyelids. Like the eyelids are never going to be like what the parents have, and they have to accept the fact before you actually go ahead with the surgical correction in these patients. Hemangiomas, again, are pretty common in the clinics. They can be superficial like this, combination of superficial and deeper component, or a purely deeper component like this. A smaller component, smaller ones like this, the superficial ones basically, which are mainly causing ptosis and chances of amblyopia, the intralesional steroid remains the conventional treatment modality, and it actually works quite well in most of the superficial hemangiomas. But sometimes we need to give multiple injections for this patient, and there are other complications which can be there with the use of steroids. For the deeper ones, they also at times are amenable to surgical excision. For example, in this child where it was pretty localized and we could take it out by doing an anterior approach excision. Oral propranolol has now almost become the first line of treatment for the deeper hemangiomas, especially the ones like these with an orbital extension, where intralesional steroids might not be a very safer option, and they respond very well to the treatments. So we do it, we give this treatment in consultation with our pediatrician, who assesses the child systemically and usually start them with a dose of 1 to 2 milligram per kg body weight in divided doses. And whatever patients we have treated now, till now we haven't seen any systemic problem or systemic complications associated with the treatment. The treatment goes on till the hemangioma is there or till your response to treatment is coming, and at times it can go on till about a year or so. Another of the child who presented with this bilateral hemangioma, he also responded quite well to oral propranolol. AV malformations, a little difficult to treat than the hemangiomas because many a times they have this vascular connection to the posterior orbit. So what we do in these cases most of the time is before trying to excise them, we inject cyanoacrylate glue within the lesion to cause this microembolization of the fetal vessels, which makes the surgical excision much more easier. Otherwise, we have to use a lot of cautery and there is a lot of bleeding, and at times the cosmetic scar or the scar and the healing process also becomes much more severe. You have to use a lot of cautery. So use of the glue actually makes the excision of these AB malformations much more easier. Colobomas, they are usually part of the clefting syndromes and can have syndromic association. And the treatment is in line of any other eyelid defect. Depending on the extent of the defect, we treat them depending on the location. But what's important here in the child is to recognize the systemic association. For example, in this child, we can see this linear nevus and also a small choriostoma lying here, the epibulbar choriostoma, and a small dermoid lying here. So these two children actually have linear nevus sebaceous syndrome, which has systemic implications. So it's important to recognize it and counsel the patients accordingly and follow up the patients also. So I'll just skip the treatment part. So in conclusion, I would just say that eyelid congenital disorder has implications in the visual development, so the treatment needs to be a little more aggressive and as minimally invasive procedure for treatment as much as possible, and we need to rule out any other systemic involvement in this child before you actually start the treatment for these patients. Thank you.